The alarm clock screamed at 0430 hours, but Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been awake for the past 2 hours, staring at the ceiling of her barracks room. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her boots, not from fear of the physical challenges ahead, but from the weight of 18 failed attempts that haunted her dreams. In exactly 3 hours, she would either become the first woman to complete the most grueling special operations training program in naval history, or she would join the long list of candidates who rang the brass bell 3 times, signaling their surrender. What she didn't know was that across the base, Commander Marcus Steele was making a decision that would change not just her fate, but the entire future of military special operations. This is the story of how a failing recruit became a legend, and how one commander's unprecedented decision transformed the definition of what it means to serve your country under fire. Sarah Chen had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates in San Francisco were worried about prom dates and college applications, she was spending her weekends at the local martial arts dojo, perfecting her technique and building the mental toughness that would later define her military career. Her immigrant parents from Taiwan had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they never had, but they never imagined those opportunities would lead her to the most dangerous training program in the United States military. The decision to join the Navy came after witnessing the September 11th attacks during her senior year of college. Sarah was studying engineering at UC Berkeley, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA while working part-time to help support her family. But, when those towers fell, something inside her shifted. She couldn't shake the image of ordinary people running toward danger to save others. That night, she called the Navy recruiting office, much to her parents' horror and confusion. Her mother, Lynn, had survived the Chinese Civil War as a child and couldn't understand why her daughter would voluntarily walk into conflict. Her father, Wei, who had worked 16-hour days in his restaurant to pay for Sarah's education, felt like his sacrifices were being thrown away. But Sarah saw it differently. She believed her parents' struggles and the opportunities America had given their family were worth protecting. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station was challenging but manageable for someone with Sarah's discipline and physical preparation. She excelled in academics, scored expert on the rifle range, and consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class. Her drill instructors noted her exceptional leadership potential and recommended her for officer candidate school. Sarah had found her calling, or so she thought. Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island was where Sarah first encountered the reality of being a minority in a male-dominated field. She was one of only 12 women in a class of 85 candidates, and the only Asian American woman. Some of her male counterparts questioned whether she belonged there, making subtle comments about diversity quotas and lowered standards. Rather than let these comments break her spirit, Sarah used them as fuel. She graduated third in her class and received her commission as an ensign. Her first assignment was aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. Sarah served as a division officer in the engineering department, managing a team of 30 sailors responsible for maintaining critical ship systems. The work was demanding and often dangerous, but she thrived in the environment. Her sailors respected her technical expertise and fair leadership style. She was known for never asking her team to do anything she wouldn't do herself, often working alongside them during particularly challenging maintenance operations. It was during a deployment to the Persian Gulf that Sarah first learned about naval special warfare. The carrier was supporting special operations missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she occasionally interacted with SEAL teams that used the ship as a staging platform. She was fascinated by their professionalism, their quiet confidence, and their unwavering commitment to their mission. These weren't the Hollywood stereotypes she had seen in movies, they were intelligent, dedicated professionals who happened to operate in the most dangerous environments on Earth. One evening, while reviewing maintenance reports in her stateroom, Sarah was approached by Master Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, a 20-year Navy veteran who had served with several SEAL teams before being assigned to the carrier. Rodriguez had been observing Sarah's leadership style and work ethic, and he saw something special in the young officer. "Ma'am, can I speak freely?" Rodriguez asked, closing the door behind him. Sarah nodded, curious about what the respected senior enlisted man wanted to discuss. "I've been watching you work, and I think you've got what it takes for something bigger than this," he said, gesturing around the small stateroom. "Have you ever considered naval special warfare?" Sarah was stunned. Women weren't allowed in direct combat roles at that time, and the idea of joining the SEALs seemed impossible. Rodriguez explained that while women couldn't join SEAL teams, there were other special operations units that might be opening to female officers soon. He had heard rumors about new programs being developed to support special operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, programs that would need officers with Sarah's combination of technical expertise and leadership ability. The conversation planted a seed that would grow over the following months. Sarah began researching special operations, reading everything she could about their history, their missions, and their training. She started incorporating more challenging physical training into her routine, running longer distances and focusing on functional fitness rather than just general conditioning. Her fellow officers thought she was preparing for some kind of fitness competition, but Sarah was preparing for something much more significant. The turning point came during a port visit to Bahrain. Sarah was having dinner at a restaurant near the base when she overheard a conversation at the next table between two Navy officers discussing a new program called Cultural Support Teams. These teams would be composed of female service members who would deploy with special operations units to interact with women and children in Iraq and Afghanistan, gathering intelligence and building relationships that male operators couldn't develop due to cultural restrictions. Sarah immediately knew this was her opportunity. She spent the rest of the deployment researching the program and preparing her application. The requirements were stringent. Candidates needed to be officers or senior enlisted personnel with exemplary service records, top-secret security clearances, and the ability to pass the same physical and mental assessments used for other special operations programs. When the carrier returned to San Diego, Sarah submitted her application within a week. The process was lengthy and invasive, involving extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and preliminary physical assessments. Many of her colleagues thought she was crazy for volunteering for such a dangerous assignment, but Sarah felt like she was finally moving toward her true purpose in the military. The selection process took 6 months, during which Sarah continued her duties aboard the carrier while secretly preparing for the challenges ahead. She worked with a civilian trainer who specialized in military fitness, focusing on the specific skills she would need for special operations training. She studied foreign languages, practiced advanced first aid techniques, and even took courses in cultural anthropology to better understand the regions where she might deploy. The call finally came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was in her stateroom reviewing training schedules when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, informing her that she had been selected for the Cultural Support Team program and would report to Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California in 30 days. Sarah's hands shook as she hung up the phone. She had dreamed of this moment for over a year, but now that it was real, the magnitude of what lay ahead hit her with full force. She would be leaving behind everything familiar and comfortable to enter a world that had never included someone like her. She was about to become a pioneer, whether she succeeded or failed. The next 30 days passed in a blur of paperwork, briefings, and goodbyes. Sarah's parents still didn't understand her decision, but they could see the determination in their daughter's eyes. Her father, who had rarely shown emotion during her childhood, hugged her tightly at the airport and whispered in her ear that he was proud of her courage, even if he didn't understand it. When Sarah arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she was struck by the stark beauty of the facility. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to the west, while the training compounds and obstacle courses seemed to promise both incredible challenges and extraordinary opportunities. She checked into her temporary quarters and tried to sleep, knowing that the next morning would begin the most difficult period of her life. The first day of training began before dawn with a physical assessment that would have been considered punishment at any other military installation. The candidates, 12 women from various branches of the military, were required to complete a 2-mile run in under 16 minutes, followed immediately by a series of calisthenics that tested every muscle group. 3 women failed to meet the minimum standards and were sent home before lunch on the first day. Sarah passed the initial assessment, but barely. Her run time was 15 minutes and 58 seconds, just 2 seconds under the cutoff. The push-ups and sit-ups were manageable, but the pull-ups nearly broke her. She managed to complete the minimum required, but her form was deteriorating by the final repetition. The instructors made note of her struggles, and Sarah could see the doubt in their eyes. The training program was designed to simulate the physical and mental stresses of operating in combat environments while working alongside elite special operations units. The candidates were subjected to sleep deprivation, extreme physical exertion, and constant psychological pressure designed to identify those who would crack under stress. The instructors, all veterans of special operations units, showed no mercy and made no allowances for the fact that they were training women. If anything, they seemed determined to prove that women couldn't handle the demands of special operations. Sarah struggled from the beginning. While her academic performance was excellent and her technical skills were superior to most of her fellow candidates, she consistently ranked in the bottom half of the class in physical assessments. The obstacle courses that seemed manageable to other candidates left her exhausted and demoralized. The long-distance runs that were supposed to build endurance instead highlighted her limitations. The low point came during the third week of training, during an exercise called surf passage. The candidates were required to carry a heavy rubber boat through the surf zone, working as a team to navigate the powerful waves while maintaining control of their equipment. Sarah's boat crew had struggled throughout the training cycle, and their teamwork was poor compared to the other teams. As they approached the surf line with their boat, Sarah could see the waves were larger than usual. The instructors had warned them that weather conditions would make the exercise particularly challenging, but there was no option to postpone or modify the training. In special operations, the enemy doesn't wait for perfect conditions, and neither could they. The first wave hit their boat like a freight train, immediately filling it with water and threatening to tear it from their grasp. Sarah, positioned at the front right corner of the boat, felt the full force of the Pacific Ocean as it tried to rip the rope from her hands. Her teammates were shouting instructions and encouragement, but the noise of the crashing waves made communication almost impossible. They made it through the first wave, barely, but the second wave was even larger. As it crashed over them, Sarah lost her footing on the sandy bottom and was pulled underwater. The weight of her equipment and the force of the water disoriented her completely. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't tell which way was up, and panic began to set in. When she finally surfaced, gasping and coughing up seawater, she realized that her team had lost control of the boat. It was being dragged back toward shore by the receding wave, and the next set was already building on the horizon. The instructors were standing on the beach, watching impassively as the candidates struggled with the elements. Sarah's team managed to regain control of the boat, but they were already behind schedule and exhausted from fighting the surf. The return trip through the waves was even more brutal, with several team members vomiting from the combination of exertion and swallowed seawater. By the time they finally dragged their boat onto the beach, they were the last team to complete the exercise, and their performance had been noted by every instructor present. That night, Sarah sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her sink. Her face was sunburned and salt-crusted, her hair was still damp with seawater, and her eyes showed the strain of constant physical and mental pressure. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, she seriously considered quitting. The next morning brought another round of physical assessments, and Sarah's performance continued to decline. She failed to meet the standard on the obstacle course for the second time that week, missing the time limit by nearly 30 seconds. Her run times were getting slower, not faster, as the accumulated fatigue took its toll on her body. Even worse, she could see the disappointment in the eyes of the instructors who had initially seemed supportive of her efforts. The breaking point came during a night navigation exercise in the mountains east of San Diego. The candidates were required to navigate a 10-mile course using only a compass and map, carrying 40 pounds of equipment through difficult terrain in complete darkness. This was a test of technical skills, mental toughness, and individual resilience, areas where Sarah had previously excelled. The exercise began at midnight, with each candidate starting at 5-minute intervals to prevent them from following each other. Sarah felt confident as she began her route, having studied the topographical map extensively and planned her approach carefully. The first few checkpoints went smoothly, and she was making good time through the rocky terrain. But, somewhere around the halfway point, Sarah made a critical navigation error. In the darkness, she misidentified a terrain feature and adjusted her course in the wrong direction. By the time she realized her mistake, she was more than a mile off course and running out of time. The sun was beginning to rise, which meant she had been moving for over 6 hours without reaching her final checkpoint. Panic set in as Sarah tried to reorient herself using the map and compass. She knew that failing to complete the navigation course would likely result in her dismissal from the program, but the more frantically she tried to correct her position, the more confused she became. The weight of her pack seemed to increase with each step, and exhaustion was clouding her judgment. When the search team finally found Sarah, she was sitting on a boulder 3 miles from her intended route, crying from frustration and exhaustion. She had been missing for over 8 hours, and the instructors had been genuinely concerned for her safety. As they loaded her into the vehicle for the ride back to base, Sarah knew that her dream of becoming a special operations officer was over. The formal dismissal came the next afternoon. Sarah was called into the office of Lieutenant Commander Patricia Williams, the officer in charge of the Cultural Support Team training program. Williams was a former intelligence officer who had volunteered to develop the program, and she genuinely believed in the potential of female operators to contribute to special operations missions. "Chen, I'm sorry, but based on your performance over the past 3 weeks, we're recommending your removal from the program," Williams said, her voice mixing professional detachment with personal disappointment. "This isn't a reflection of your character or your potential as a naval officer, but the standards for this program are non-negotiable." Sarah had expected this moment, but hearing the words still hit her like a physical blow. She had poured everything she had into the training, pushing herself beyond what she thought were her limits, and it hadn't been enough. The dream that had sustained her through months of preparation was dying in a sterile office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "I understand, ma'am," Sarah managed to say, fighting to keep her voice steady. "When do I need to report to my next assignment?" Williams handed her a folder containing her new orders. Sarah was being transferred to Naval Support Activity Bahrain, where she would serve as a maintenance officer supporting fleet operations in the Persian Gulf. It was a good assignment for a junior officer, but it felt like a consolation prize after coming so close to something extraordinary. That evening, Sarah packed her belongings while her remaining classmates prepared for another week of training. She could hear them in the corridor outside her room, discussing the next day's challenges with the mixture of excitement and apprehension that had become familiar over the past month. She felt like she was listening to conversations from another world, one that she would never be able to enter. As she carried her bags to the car that would take her to the airport, Sarah took one last look at the training facilities where she had given everything she had. The obstacle course where she had struggled, the classroom where she had excelled, the barracks where she had lain awake at night wondering if she was strong enough for what lay ahead. She had learned more about herself in 3 weeks than in her previous 3 years in the Navy, even if the lessons had been painful. The flight to Bahrain gave Sarah time to reflect on what had gone wrong and what she might have done differently. She knew that her physical preparation had been inadequate, but she also wondered if she had been mentally prepared for the intensity of the training. The constant pressure and evaluation had worn her down more than she had anticipated, and she questioned whether she had the psychological resilience required for special operations. What Sarah didn't know was that her story wasn't over. 3,000 miles away, in a secure conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command, her performance in the Cultural Support Team program was being discussed by some of the most senior officers in the special operations community. They had been watching the program closely, and several of them had taken note of the young lieutenant who had failed the training but had impressed them with her determination and technical competence. Among those officers was Commander Marcus Steele, a career SEAL officer who had been tasked with developing new approaches to special operations training and integration. Steele had reviewed the files of all the Cultural Support Team candidates, and something about Sarah's record had caught his attention. Her failure in training was obvious, but her potential was intriguing to someone who had spent 15 years identifying and developing special operations talent. Steele had been thinking about the future of military operations and the changing nature of conflict. He believed that the traditional model of special operations needed to evolve to meet emerging threats, and that evolution might require taking risks on unconventional candidates. Sarah Chen represented exactly the kind of risk that might pay extraordinary dividends if handled correctly. As Sarah settled into her new assignment in Bahrain, unaware of the discussions taking place about her future, she tried to focus on rebuilding her naval career and moving forward from her failure. She threw herself into her work, managing maintenance operations for a squadron of patrol boats operating in the Persian Gulf. Her technical expertise and leadership skills made her valuable in her new role, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something more significant. The routine of her new assignment provided a welcome respite from the intensity of the failed training program, but it also gave her time to think about what might have been. Every morning as she ran along the waterfront at the naval facility, she thought about her classmates who were probably still suffering through the remaining weeks of Cultural Support Team training. She wondered how many of them would successfully complete the program and go on to serve with special operations units in combat. Sarah's parents were relieved that their daughter was in a relatively safe assignment, but they could hear the disappointment in her voice during their weekly phone calls. They had watched her pursue this dream with single-minded determination, and they knew that the failure had shaken her confidence in ways that went beyond her military career. For the first time in her life, Sarah Chen had encountered a challenge that she couldn't overcome through hard work and determination alone. What none of them knew was that sometimes failure is just the first step toward an opportunity that exceeds your wildest dreams. And, sometimes, the most unconventional paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. 6 months into her assignment in Bahrain, Sarah had settled into a routine that was both professionally satisfying and personally frustrating. Her days were filled with the technical challenges of maintaining patrol boat systems in the harsh environment of the Persian Gulf, where salt spray, extreme heat, and constant operations pushed equipment to its limits. She had earned the respect of her sailors and the recognition of her superiors, but the work felt hollow compared to the purpose she had felt during those brief weeks of special operations training. The Naval Support Activity Bahrain was a bustling hub of military operations, supporting everything from routine patrols to highly classified missions throughout the region. Sarah's maintenance facility was located near the Special Operations Compound, and she occasionally saw teams of operators preparing for deployments or returning from missions. These encounters were painful reminders of the path she had failed to complete, but they also reinforced her belief that she belonged in that world somehow. Sarah had thrown herself into physical training with renewed determination since arriving in Bahrain. The failure at Coronado had taught her that her physical preparation had been inadequate, and she was determined not to make the same mistake again if another opportunity arose. Every morning at 0500, she ran 5 miles through the base in the pre-dawn darkness, pushing herself to improve her times and build the endurance that had failed her during training. She had also hired a local trainer who worked with military personnel, focusing on functional fitness and the specific skills required for special operations. Her new training regimen was punishing by any standard, but Sarah approached it with the methodical precision that had made her successful in engineering. She tracked every workout, measured every improvement, and analyzed every weakness with the same attention to detail she applied to troubleshooting complex mechanical systems. Her fellow officers thought she was training for a marathon or some other athletic competition, and Sarah didn't correct their assumptions. The improvements were dramatic. Within 3 months, Sarah had cut 2 minutes off her 5-mile run time and doubled her performance on pull-ups, which had been her greatest weakness during the cultural support team training. She felt stronger and more confident than ever before, but she also knew that physical fitness was only part of what had been required for special operations. The mental toughness and resilience needed to succeed in that environment were harder to develop on her own. Sarah's commanding officer, Commander Robert Hayes, had noticed the changes in his maintenance officer. Hayes was a Mustang officer who had worked his way up from the enlisted ranks over 20 years, and he had developed a keen ability to read people and understand their motivations. He could see that Sarah was preparing for something beyond her current assignment, and he suspected it was related to her brief stint in special operations training. One afternoon in September, Hayes called Sarah into his office for what she assumed would be a routine performance counseling session. Instead, she found Commander Hayes reviewing her service record with an expression of curiosity rather than evaluation. "Chen, I've been looking at your file, and I have to ask, what the hell are you doing here?" Hayes said with characteristic bluntness. "You've got the technical skills to be running engineering departments on carriers, the leadership potential to command ships, and, according to this fitness report, you're in the best shape of any officer on this base. So why are you stuck maintaining patrol boats in Bahrain?" Sarah was caught off guard by the question. She had expected to discuss maintenance schedules and personnel issues, not her career trajectory and personal goals. She considered giving a diplomatic answer about serving wherever the Navy needed her, but something in Hayes's expression suggested he would see through any attempt at deflection. "Sir, I applied for a special program last year and didn't make it through training," she said carefully. "This assignment is helping me develop my technical skills while I figure out my next steps." Hayes nodded knowingly. "The Cultural Support Team Program. I heard about that from some people I know in the community. They said you had potential but weren't quite ready for what they were asking." He leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah for a moment before continuing. "The question is, what are you doing to make sure you're ready next time?" The conversation that followed was unlike any Sarah had experienced with a senior officer. Hayes shared his own story of multiple attempts to qualify for various special programs during his enlisted career, including several failures that had taught him valuable lessons about preparation and perseverance. He explained that success in special operations wasn't just about meeting physical standards or demonstrating technical competence, it was about developing the mental resilience to continue functioning when everything around you was falling apart. "The thing about special ops," Hayes said, "is that they're not just looking for people who can meet the standard. They're looking for people who can exceed the standard when it matters most, usually when they're exhausted, scared, and operating with incomplete information. The training is designed to simulate those conditions and identify people who get stronger under pressure rather than weaker." Hayes suggested that Sarah consider volunteering for additional training opportunities that would test her mental toughness and leadership under stress. He mentioned advanced seamanship courses, combat lifesaver training, and foreign language schools as ways to develop the breadth of skills valued by the special operations community. More importantly, he offered to connect her with other officers who had successfully transitioned into special operations roles. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters thinking about the conversation with Commander Hayes. She had spent the past 6 months focused on physical improvement, but she realized that she had been neglecting the mental and leadership aspects of special operations preparation. The failure at Coronado had shaken her confidence, and she had been approaching her training like someone trying to avoid future failure rather than someone preparing for extraordinary success. The next morning, Sarah submitted applications for 3 advanced training programs that would take place during her remaining time in Bahrain. She enrolled in Arabic language classes offered by the Defense Language Institute, volunteered for advanced first aid and combat lifesaver certification, and requested permission to attend a joint training exercise with British Royal Marines scheduled for the following month. Each of these programs added significant demands to her already busy schedule, but Sarah approached them with the same systematic preparation that had served her well throughout her career. She studied Arabic vocabulary during her lunch breaks, practiced medical procedures with the base hospital staff, and coordinated with the British Marines to understand their training methodology and expectations. The joint exercise with the Royal Marines was particularly valuable for Sarah's development. The British commandos had a different approach to training and operations than their American counterparts, emphasizing adaptability and creative problem-solving over standardized procedures. Sarah found herself challenged in new ways as she worked alongside Marines who expected her to contribute as an equal partner regardless of her gender or nationality. The exercise scenario involved a complex humanitarian mission in a simulated conflict zone, requiring coordination between multiple units with different capabilities and priorities. Sarah was assigned as the liaison officer between an American engineering unit and a British reconnaissance team, a role that demanded constant communication, quick decision-making, and the ability to translate between different military cultures and procedures. The first day of the exercise was chaotic, with communication breakdowns and conflicting priorities threatening to derail the mission. Sarah found herself in the middle of heated discussions between American and British officers who had different approaches to the same problems. Rather than simply relay messages between the two groups, she began identifying common ground and proposing solutions that met both units' requirements. By the second day, Sarah had become an essential part of the command structure, with both American and British officers seeking her input on operational decisions. She was operating on minimal sleep and dealing with constant pressure, but instead of wearing her down, the challenges seemed to energize her. For the first time since her failure at Coronado, Sarah felt like she was in her element. The exercise culminated with a complex night operation that required precise coordination between engineering and reconnaissance assets. Sarah found herself managing multiple radio networks, coordinating helicopter insertions, and making real-time adjustments to the operational plan as conditions on the ground changed. The mission was successful, and the after-action review highlighted her performance as a key factor in the positive outcome. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the British Marine officer who had commanded the exercise, sought out Sarah during the closing ceremony. Morrison was a veteran of multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had worked extensively with American Special Operations Forces throughout his career. "Lieutenant Chen, I've been watching your performance this week, and I wanted to tell you that you've got something special," Morrison said. "You have the ability to see the big picture while managing the details, and you perform better under pressure than most officers with twice your experience. Have you considered applying for advanced military schools or special programs?" Sarah explained her failed attempt at the Cultural Support Team program, but Morrison dismissed the setback as irrelevant to her current capabilities. "Training programs are designed to identify potential, not predict future performance," he said. "The person I watched this week is ready for much greater challenges than you were 6 months ago. Don't let one failure define what you think you're capable of achieving." The conversation with Morrison planted a seed that would grow over the following weeks. Sarah began researching other special operations programs that might be open to female officers, including emerging roles in intelligence, cyber warfare, and unconventional operations. She learned that the special operations community was evolving rapidly in response to changing threats, and new opportunities were being created for officers with unique skill sets and perspectives. Sarah's research led her to discover that several special operations units were experimenting with integrated teams that included specialists from various backgrounds, including engineering, intelligence, and foreign area expertise. These teams were being developed to handle complex missions that required more than traditional direct action capabilities, and they were actively seeking officers who could contribute multiple skill sets to challenging operational problems. The more Sarah learned about these emerging opportunities, the more excited she became about the possibility of contributing to special operations in a meaningful way. She realized that her failure at the Cultural Support Team program might have been a blessing in disguise, forcing her to develop a broader range of skills and a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and limitations. In December, Sarah received an email that would change the trajectory of her career once again. The message was from Commander Marcus Steele at Naval Special Warfare Command, requesting a secure phone conversation at her earliest convenience. Sarah had never heard of Commander Steele, but a quick search revealed that he was a career SEAL officer with extensive operational experience and a reputation for innovative thinking about special operations training and employment. The phone call took place in a secure conference room at the Naval Support Activity, with Sarah sitting alone at a table facing an encrypted communication system that connected her directly to Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. Commander Steele's voice was calm and professional as he explained the purpose of his call. "Lieutenant Chen, I've been reviewing your service record and your performance in various training programs, including your time in the Cultural Support Team program," Steele began. "I'm calling because I'm developing a new training program that might interest you, and I believe you might be exactly the kind of officer we're looking for." Steele explained that he was creating an experimental training program designed to identify and develop officers who could serve as special operations liaisons in complex, multinational operations. The program would combine elements of traditional special operations training with advanced technical education and cultural immersion experiences. Most importantly, the program would be open to officers from all services and backgrounds, with selection based on potential rather than previous special operations experience. The traditional model of special operations training is designed to produce operators who excel in direct action missions, Steele continued. But the future of special operations will require people who can think strategically, communicate across cultural boundaries, and integrate advanced technology with human intelligence. We think you might have the combination of technical expertise, leadership potential, and mental toughness needed for this new role. Sarah listened in amazement as Steele outlined a program that seemed specifically designed for someone with her background and interests. The training would last 6 months and would include phases in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Successful candidates would be assigned to special operations units as liaison officers, working directly with commanders on complex operational planning and execution. The selection process would be different from traditional special operations programs, with greater emphasis on problem solving, cultural adaptation, and technical innovation. Physical fitness would still be important, but candidates would be evaluated more on their ability to learn and adapt than on their ability to meet arbitrary physical standards on their first attempt. "I should be clear about one thing," Steele said as the call neared its end. "This is not a consolation prize or an alternative path for people who couldn't make it through traditional special operations training. This program will be more challenging than anything currently offered by the special operations community, and the operational assignments will be more dangerous than most traditional special operations deployments. We're looking for volunteers, not people who need a second chance." The distinction was important to Sarah, who had struggled with feeling like her failure at Coronado had marked her as someone who couldn't handle special operations challenges. Steele was offering her an opportunity to compete for a role that would be even more demanding than what she had failed to achieve, but based on a broader assessment of her potential rather than a narrow evaluation of her current capabilities. Steele gave Sarah 2 weeks to consider the opportunity and discuss it with her current command. If she decided to apply, she would need to submit a comprehensive application package including detailed essays about her motivation, leadership philosophy, and vision for the future of special operations. She would also need to complete several preliminary assessments, including updated physical fitness tests, psychological evaluations, and technical examinations. After the call ended, Sarah sat alone in the conference room trying to process what had just happened. 6 months ago, she had been dismissed from special operations training as someone who couldn't meet the standards. Now, one of the most senior officers in the special operations community was offering her the chance to compete for a program that would exceed anything she had previously imagined. The opportunity was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more, but it also represented an enormous risk. If she failed again, it would probably end any possibility of future involvement with special operations. Her current assignment in Bahrain was comfortable and successful, and she could build a respectable naval career without taking the risk of another potential failure. That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the opportunity. As expected, they were concerned about their daughter volunteering for an even more dangerous assignment, but they could hear the excitement in her voice as she described the program and its potential impact on her career. Her father, who had initially opposed her military service, surprised her by encouraging her to pursue the opportunity. "You've never been satisfied with safe choices," Wei Chen told his daughter. "If this is what you believe you're meant to do, then you should do it with everything you have. Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make." The conversation with her parents helped Sarah realize that her decision had already been made during the phone call with Commander Steele. This was the opportunity she had been preparing for without realizing it, and all of her experiences since the failure at Coronado had been building toward this moment. The next morning, Sarah met with Commander Hayes to discuss the opportunity and request his support for her application. Hayes was not surprised by the offer, having suspected that Sarah's exceptional performance in Bahrain would eventually attract attention from the special operations community. "Chen, this is exactly the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career," Hayes said after reviewing the program description. "Commander Steele has a reputation for identifying talent and developing officers who go on to have extraordinary careers. If he thinks you're ready for this program, then you probably are." Hayes offered to help Sarah prepare her application package, drawing on his extensive network of contacts throughout the Navy to provide insights into what the selection board would be looking for in candidates. He also arranged for Sarah to take leave for additional training and preparation, recognizing that this opportunity could benefit not just Sarah's career but also the broader Navy's relationship with the special operations community. Over the following 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparing what she knew would be the most important application of her career. She wrote and rewrote her essays, carefully crafting explanations of her motivation that were honest about her previous failure while demonstrating her growth and development since then. She studied the biographies and careers of successful special operations officers, looking for patterns and characteristics that she could incorporate into her own preparation. The physical fitness preparation was particularly intense, as Sarah knew that her previous failure in this area would be scrutinized carefully by the selection board. She worked with a personal trainer to develop a training plan that would ensure she exceeded every physical standard, not just met minimum requirements. She also incorporated mental resilience training, using meditation and visualization techniques to prepare for the psychological challenges of the selection process. On the day she submitted her application, Sarah felt more prepared and confident than she had ever been in her military career. She had learned from her previous failure, developed new skills and capabilities, and, most importantly, gained a deeper understanding of herself and her potential. Whether she was selected for the program or not, she knew that she had grown tremendously during her time in Bahrain and was ready for greater challenges. The waiting period that followed was agonizing, but Sarah used the time to continue her preparation and focus on her current responsibilities. She knew that selection for the program was far from guaranteed, and that her performance in Bahrain would be evaluated as part of the overall assessment. She was determined to finish her current assignment with the same excellence that had characterized her entire naval career. 3 weeks after submitting her application, Sarah received a secure email that would change her life forever. The message was brief and formal, but its content was everything she had hoped for. "Lieutenant Chen, you have been selected for participation in the Special Operations Liaison Officer Development Program. Report to Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado, California, no later than February 15 for program commencement. Congratulations." As Sarah read the email for the 5th time, she realized that her journey was just beginning. The failure that had nearly ended her special operations dreams had actually been the catalyst for something far more significant than she had originally imagined. She was about to return to the place where she had experienced her greatest failure, but this time she would be arriving as a carefully selected candidate for a program that could define the future of special operations. The young woman who had failed surf passage 6 months earlier no longer existed. In her place was an officer who had learned from failure, grown from adversity, and developed the mental toughness and technical expertise needed for the most challenging missions her country could offer. Sarah Chen was ready for whatever Commander Steele and his program could throw at her. What she didn't yet know was that she was about to face challenges that would make her previous failure seem like a minor setback, and that her success in the program would depend not just on her individual preparation but on her ability to think beyond traditional approaches to military problems. The real test was still ahead, and it would require everything she had learned about herself and, more than she currently imagined she was capable of achieving. Sarah's return to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in February was surreal. The same Pacific breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility, but everything else had changed. She was no longer the untested lieutenant who had arrived with dreams bigger than her preparation. She was now a seasoned officer with combat zone experience, advanced technical training, and, most importantly, a deep understanding of her own capabilities and limitations. The Special Operations Liaison Officer Development Program was headquartered in a new facility that Sarah didn't recognize from her previous stay. The building was modern and sophisticated, with state-of-the-art classrooms, advanced simulation facilities, and living quarters that reflected the program's emphasis on developing officers rather than simply testing their endurance. This was clearly a different kind of training environment than the Spartan facilities used for traditional special operations programs. Sarah arrived on base 3 days before the official program start date, using the extra time to reacquaint herself with the area and mentally prepare for what lay ahead. She stayed in the same type of temporary quarters she had occupied during her failed cultural support team training, but the similarities ended there. This time, she felt like she belonged in the environment rather than fighting to prove she deserved to be there. On the morning of February 15, Sarah joined 23 other officers from all branches of the military in a conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The group was remarkably diverse, including pilots, intelligence officers, engineers, doctors, and linguists from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. What they all shared was exceptional performance in their respective fields and demonstrated potential for leadership in complex, high-stakes environments. Commander Marcus Steele entered the room at precisely 0800, and his presence immediately commanded attention. Steele was not physically imposing, he was average height with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades operating in harsh environments. But his calm confidence and penetrating gaze made it clear that he was someone who had earned respect through performance rather than position. "Welcome to the Special Operations Liaison Officer Development Program," Steele began, his voice carrying easily through the room without amplification. "You are here because you represent the future of special operations, not its past. The challenges our nation faces in the coming decades will require new approaches, new thinking, and new types of leaders. You have been selected not because you fit the traditional mold of special operations officers, but because you have the potential to break that mold in productive ways." Steele explained that the program would consist of 4 phases, each designed to test and develop different aspects of their capabilities. The first phase would focus on advanced problem-solving and leadership under pressure. The second phase would involve cultural immersion and language training. The third phase would consist of technical integration and innovation challenges. The final phase would be a capstone exercise that would simulate the type of complex, multi-dimensional operations they would face as liaison officers. Unlike traditional special operations training, the program would not eliminate candidates based on their ability to meet predetermined physical standards. Instead, officers who struggled in particular areas would receive additional training and support to help them succeed. The emphasis was on development rather than selection, with the understanding that the investment required to train liaison officers was too significant to waste on artificial barriers. That said, Steele continued, this program will be more challenging than any traditional special operations training you might have completed. We will push you intellectually, physically, emotionally, and ethically in ways that will test everything you think you know about yourself and your capabilities. Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you had, and all of you will confront weaknesses you didn't know existed. The first week of training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. Rather than physical challenges and rote memorization, the program focused on complex problem-solving scenarios that required creativity, collaboration, and the ability to synthesize information from multiple sources. The candidates were divided into teams and presented with realistic operational scenarios that had no predetermined solutions. Sarah's first major challenge came during an exercise called the Ambassador's Dilemma. Her team was tasked with developing a strategy to rescue American civilians from a fictional country experiencing a complex humanitarian crisis involving ethnic conflict, natural disaster, and political instability. The scenario was designed to have no clear military solution, requiring the team to integrate diplomatic, humanitarian, intelligence, and military considerations into a comprehensive approach. Sarah found herself naturally gravitating toward the technical aspects of the problem, analyzing logistics requirements, communication challenges, and infrastructure limitations. But, as the team's discussions progressed, she realized that her engineering background gave her a unique perspective on the broader strategic challenges. She could see connections between seemingly unrelated factors and identify potential solutions that others missed. The breakthrough came when Sarah suggested approaching the problem from a systems perspective rather than trying to solve individual challenges separately. She proposed treating the entire crisis as a complex system with multiple interdependent variables, then identifying interventions that could create positive cascading effects throughout the system. Her approach allowed the team to develop an elegant solution that addressed multiple objectives simultaneously. The exercise debriefing was conducted by Steele himself, along with a panel of senior officers from various special operations units. Sarah's team was asked to present their solution to the panel and defend their reasoning under aggressive questioning. The experience was intimidating, but Sarah found that her confidence grew as she explained the technical foundations of their approach. Lieutenant Chen, Steele said during the questioning, "Your team's solution is creative and technically sound, but it requires a level of coordination between agencies and organizations that has never been achieved in a real crisis. How do you address the inevitable bureaucratic and political obstacles that would prevent implementation?" The question was exactly the kind of challenge that had intimidated Sarah during her previous training experience, but this time she felt prepared to engage with the complexity rather than avoiding it. She had spent months thinking about the gap between theoretical solutions and practical implementation, and she had developed ideas about how to bridge that gap. "Sir, I think the key is designing solutions that create incentives for cooperation rather than depending on goodwill or perfect coordination," Sarah replied. "If we structure the operation so that each agency's success is directly linked to the overall mission success, then bureaucratic obstacles become shared problems that everyone has an incentive to solve." The response seemed to satisfy Steele, who nodded approvingly before moving on to question other team members. But Sarah could see that her answer had impressed the panel, and she felt a surge of confidence that had been missing during her previous training experience. The second week introduced physical challenges, but not in the way Sarah had expected. Rather than testing raw endurance or strength, the exercises were designed to evaluate performance under stress, adaptability to changing conditions, and the ability to maintain cognitive function while physically challenged. Sarah's months of intensive preparation in Bahrain served her well, but, more importantly, she found that her mental approach to physical challenges had fundamentally changed. The key exercise was called the moving target, in which individual candidates were required to navigate a complex obstacle course while simultaneously solving mathematical problems, communicating with team members via radio, and adapting to changing course configurations. The exercise was designed to simulate the cognitive demands of operating in dynamic, high-stress environments where multiple tasks must be managed simultaneously. Sarah's engineering background proved invaluable for the mathematical components, but the real challenge was maintaining focus and communication while physically exerted. She had learned from her previous failure that panic and frustration were the real enemies, not physical limitations. This time, when she encountered obstacles that challenged her, she focused on problem-solving rather than self-doubt. Halfway through the course, Sarah encountered a wall that was higher than she could reach with a normal jump. In her previous training, this type of obstacle had triggered anxiety about her physical limitations and fears about failing to meet standards. This time, she immediately began analyzing the problem from an engineering perspective, looking for creative solutions rather than assuming she had to overcome the obstacle through brute force. She noticed that the wall had irregularities in its surface that could serve as handholds if approached from the correct angle. More importantly, she realized that a nearby obstacle could be used as a stepping stone if she was willing to backtrack and approach the wall differently. The solution required sacrificing time for efficiency, but it worked perfectly and allowed her to continue the course with confidence intact. The radio communication component proved to be equally challenging, requiring Sarah to relay complex information to team members while maintaining her own situational awareness. She discovered that her technical background helped her organize and transmit information clearly, but she also had to learn to adapt her communication style to work with team members who had different backgrounds and thinking styles. By the end of the second week, Sarah felt like she was hitting her stride in a way that had never happened during her previous training. She was consistently performing in the top quarter of the class, but, more importantly, she felt like she was contributing to the team in meaningful ways. Her fellow candidates had begun seeking her input on technical challenges, and the instructors seemed to view her as someone with significant potential rather than someone who was struggling to meet minimum standards. The third phase of training took place at a joint facility in Colorado, where the candidates would spend 3 weeks learning advanced technical integration and innovation methodologies. Sarah was excited about this phase, as it was directly aligned with her engineering background and technical interests. What she didn't expect was how challenging it would be to apply her technical skills in the ambiguous, rapidly changing environment of special operations. The Colorado facility was a partnership between military special operations units and civilian technology companies, designed to accelerate the development and deployment of advanced capabilities for special operations forces. The candidates would work alongside civilian engineers, intelligence analysts, and academic researchers on real-world projects that had direct operational relevance. Sarah's first assignment was to work with a team developing improved communication systems for special operations units operating in contested environments. The technical challenges were fascinating, involving signal processing, encryption, network resilience, and human-machine interface design. But the operational requirements were constantly evolving based on feedback from units deployed in actual combat zones, forcing the team to adapt their designs in real time. The project leader was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former Air Force officer who had transitioned to civilian research after completing her PhD in electrical engineering. Vasquez was brilliant and demanding, with little patience for theoretical solutions that couldn't be implemented in practice. She pushed the team to think beyond technical specifications and consider the human factors that would determine whether their solutions would actually be used effectively in combat. "Engineering is the easy part," Vasquez told Sarah during their first project meeting. "The hard part is designing solutions that work when used by exhausted, stressed operators in life or death situations. You can create the most elegant technical solution in the world, but if it requires operators to think differently than they've been trained, it will fail when it matters most." The insight was revelatory for Sarah, who had always approached engineering problems as purely technical challenges. Working on communication systems for special operations forced her to consider psychological, cultural, and operational factors that she had never encountered in traditional engineering roles. She had to learn to think like an operator as well as an engineer, understanding not just how things worked but how they would be used in practice. The breakthrough came during the second week of the project, when Sarah was observing a demonstration of the team's prototype communication system. The system worked flawlessly in controlled conditions, but the operators testing it were clearly frustrated by aspects of its design that seemed minor from a technical perspective. Sarah realized that the team had been solving the wrong problem. They had focused on technical performance rather than operational effectiveness. Sarah proposed a radical redesign that prioritized simplicity and intuitive operation over technical sophistication. Her approach would sacrifice some theoretical performance in favor of reliability and ease of use under stress. The proposal was controversial within the team, with several members arguing that it represented a step backward in technical capability. Dr. Vasquez supported Sarah's approach, recognizing that her proposal reflected a deeper understanding of the operational environment than the purely technical solutions favored by other team members. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need from liaison officers," Vasquez told the team. "The ability to bridge the gap between what's technically possible and what's operationally effective." The revised communication system was tested by a team of active special operations personnel, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did the system perform reliably under stress, but the operators were able to use it effectively after minimal training. The success of the project earned Sarah recognition from the facility leadership and validation of her approach to technical problem solving. The fourth week of the Colorado phase involved a comprehensive exercise that combined all of the skills developed during the previous weeks. The candidates were divided into teams and tasked with developing complete solutions to complex operational challenges, including technical systems, operational procedures, and training protocols. The exercise was designed to simulate the type of comprehensive problem-solving they would face as liaison officers working with special operations units. Sarah's team was tasked with developing a solution for conducting humanitarian operations in areas with limited infrastructure and hostile populations. The challenge required integrating multiple technologies, coordinating with various agencies and organizations, and developing procedures that could be adapted to different cultural and operational contexts. Sarah found herself naturally assuming a leadership role within the team, drawing on her technical expertise to guide the development of technical solutions while also facilitating discussions about operational and cultural considerations. Her experience in Bahrain had taught her how to work effectively with people from different backgrounds and specialties, and these skills proved invaluable for managing the diverse perspectives within her team. The final presentation took place in an auditorium filled with senior officers from various special operations units, civilian researchers, and government officials. Sarah's team was scheduled to present last, which created additional pressure but also allowed them to learn from the presentations of other teams. When their turn came, Sarah took the lead in presenting the technical components of their solution, explaining complex systems and procedures in terms that non-technical audience members could understand. She had learned from Dr. Vasquez that effective communication required adapting her message to her audience, not just presenting technical information accurately. The question and answer session was intense, with audience members challenging every aspect of the team's proposal. Sarah found herself fielding questions about technical specifications, operational procedures, cost-effectiveness, and cultural sensitivity. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of the questions, she found that her months of preparation and training had equipped her to engage confidently with the full range of challenges. The pivotal moment came when a senior SEAL officer questioned whether their proposed solution was practical for units operating with limited resources and time constraints. The question was exactly the type of operational reality check that Sarah had learned to anticipate during her technical training. "Sir, that's exactly why we designed the system to be modular and scalable," Sarah replied. "A unit with limited resources can implement the basic components and still achieve significant operational benefits. As resources and time allow, they can add additional capabilities without having to redesign their entire approach. We've essentially created a technical solution that adapts to operational constraints rather than imposing additional requirements." The response demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking that the program was designed to develop, the ability to bridge technical and operational considerations in ways that created practical solutions to complex problems. The audience nodded approvingly, and Sarah could see that she had successfully articulated the value proposition of her team's approach. At the end of the Colorado phase, Commander Steele conducted individual counseling sessions with each candidate to discuss their performance and development during the program. Sarah's session took place in Steele's office, a modest space decorated with photographs from various special operations deployments and academic certificates from advanced military education programs. "Chen, I want to start by saying that your performance during this phase has been exceptional," Steele began. "You've demonstrated exactly the kind of technical leadership and innovative thinking we're looking for in liaison officers. But, more importantly, you've shown the ability to learn and adapt in ways that will be essential for success in operational environments." Steele explained that the final phase of training would be the most challenging, involving a month-long exercise that would simulate the type of complex, multi-dimensional operations that liaison officers would face in their assignments. The exercise would take place in multiple countries and would involve working with foreign military units, civilian organizations, and government agencies. The final exercise will test everything you've learned during the previous phases, but it will also require you to operate independently and make decisions with incomplete information, Steele continued. "This is where we separate the officers who can execute well-defined tasks from those who can create solutions to problems that haven't been solved before." Sarah left the counseling session feeling confident about her preparation and excited about the challenges ahead. She had come further than she had ever imagined possible when she first arrived at Coronado, and she was beginning to understand what Steele meant about breaking the traditional mold of special operations officers. The 2-week break between the Colorado phase and the final exercise gave Sarah time to reflect on her journey and prepare for the ultimate test of her development. She spent the time in San Diego, taking advantage of the physical training facilities at Coronado while also studying the cultural and political contexts of the regions where the final exercise would take place. During this break, Sarah received a letter from her parents that reinforced how much she had changed during the program. Her father wrote that he had been following news reports about women in combat roles and special operations, and he was proud that his daughter was part of the generation that was expanding opportunities for future military women. "You have always been willing to challenge yourself in ways that scared your mother and me," her father wrote. "But now we understand that you were preparing for something important, not just taking unnecessary risks. We are proud of the officer you have become and excited to see what you will accomplish in the future." The letter reminded Sarah that her success in the program represented more than personal achievement. She was helping to prove that women could contribute to special operations in ways that had never been tested before. The responsibility was both inspiring and daunting, as she knew that her performance would influence future opportunities for other women. As the final phase approached, Sarah felt more prepared and confident than she had ever been in her military career. She had developed technical skills, leadership capabilities, and cultural awareness that exceeded anything she had possessed when she first attempted special operations training. More importantly, she had learned to trust her own judgment and abilities in ways that would be essential for independent operation in challenging environments. What she didn't yet know was that the final exercise would test her in ways that went beyond anything she had experienced during training, and that her success would depend not just on her individual capabilities but on her ability to inspire and lead others under the most challenging circumstances possible. The real test of her development as a Special Operations Liaison Officer was about to begin, and it would determine whether she was ready for the extraordinary responsibilities that awaited her. The final exercise began at 0300 hours on a Tuesday morning in July, with Sarah and 5 other candidates boarding a military transport aircraft at Naval Air Station North Island. Their destination was classified, their mission parameters were deliberately vague, and they would be operating with minimal support for the next 30 days. This was the culmination of everything they had learned during 6 months of intensive training. Commander Steele accompanied the team for the first leg of their journey, using the flight time to provide final guidance and clarification of their objectives. The exercise scenario involved a complex humanitarian crisis in a fictional country that combined elements of real-world challenges from multiple regions. The candidates would serve as liaison officers coordinating between American Special Operations Forces, international relief organizations, and local government agencies. The key to success in this exercise, Steele explained as the aircraft flew through the pre-dawn darkness, is understanding that there are no predetermined solutions. Every decision you make will create new challenges and opportunities, and you'll need to adapt constantly to changing conditions. Your technical skills and training will be important, but your judgment and leadership will be what determines your success. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she listened to Steele's briefing. She had excelled in every phase of the training program, but this exercise would test her ability to apply everything she had learned in a realistic, high-pressure environment. Unlike the controlled training scenarios of the previous months, this exercise would involve real stakes and genuine uncertainty. The aircraft landed at a military airfield in Eastern Europe, where the candidates transferred to a smaller transport for the final leg of their journey. Sarah looked out the small window as they flew over mountains and valleys that would serve as the backdrop for their exercise, trying to mentally prepare for the challenges ahead while also appreciating the surreal nature of her situation. 6 months earlier, she had been maintaining patrol boats in Bahrain, focused on technical problems with clear solutions and predictable outcomes. Now she was flying toward a mission that would test her ability to operate as a Special Operations Liaison Officer in one of the most complex and demanding training exercises ever designed for military personnel. The exercise began immediately upon arrival at the staging area, a temporary facility that had been constructed to simulate a forward operating base in a crisis zone. Sarah and her fellow candidates were met by actors playing the roles of military commanders, government officials, relief organization representatives, and local leaders. Each actor had been thoroughly briefed on their character's background, motivations, and objectives, creating a realistic environment where the candidates would need to navigate competing interests and limited resources. Sarah's first assignment was to serve as the liaison between a Navy SEAL team conducting reconnaissance operations and a team of civilian engineers working to restore critical infrastructure. The two groups had different priorities, operating procedures, and risk tolerances, creating natural conflicts that Sarah would need to resolve while ensuring that both teams could accomplish their missions effectively. The SEAL team was led by Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, a career Special Operations officer with multiple combat deployments who had volunteered to participate in the exercise as a way to evaluate the liaison officer concept. Morrison was skeptical about the value of having liaison officers integrated into special operations units, believing that they would slow down operations and create unnecessary complications. "Lieutenant Chen, I need you to understand something from the beginning," Morrison told Sarah during their first meeting. "My team has been operating together for 3 years, and we've developed procedures and protocols that work for us. We're willing to work with you, but we're not going to change our operational methods to accommodate someone who doesn't have special operations experience." The challenge was exactly what Sarah had been trained to handle, but it was still intimidating to face skepticism from experienced operators who questioned her qualifications and value. She knew that earning their respect would require demonstrating competence rather than simply asserting her authority as a liaison officer. Sarah's approach was to focus on understanding the SEAL team's operational requirements and constraints before proposing any changes or improvements. She spent the first day observing their planning processes, equipment procedures, and communication protocols, taking careful notes and asking questions that demonstrated her interest in learning rather than critiquing their methods. Her engineering background proved valuable for understanding the technical aspects of their operations, and her experience in Bahrain had taught her how to work effectively with operational units under pressure. More importantly, Her months of training had developed her confidence and communication skills to the point where she could engage with the team as a professional peer rather than an observer trying to prove her worth. The breakthrough came on the second day, when the SEAL team encountered a technical problem with their communication equipment that threatened to compromise their reconnaissance mission. The equipment was functioning within specifications, but the environmental conditions were causing interference that degraded the quality of their transmissions. Morrison was preparing to abort the mission when Sarah asked permission to examine the problem. Drawing on her technical training and her experience with communication systems in harsh environments, Sarah quickly identified the source of the interference and proposed a solution that would allow the team to complete their mission. Her approach involved reconfiguring the equipment in a way that sacrificed some theoretical performance for improved reliability under the specific conditions they were facing. "How do you know this will work?" Morrison asked, clearly intrigued by Sarah's proposal but reluctant to stake his mission on an untested modification. "Sir, I dealt with similar interference problems when I was maintaining patrol boat systems in the Persian Gulf," Sarah replied. "The principle is the same, you have to optimize for actual conditions rather than ideal specifications. The modification will reduce your maximum transmission range by about 10%, but it will give you reliable communication within your operational area." Morrison decided to implement Sarah's solution, and it worked exactly as she had predicted. The mission proceeded successfully, and the SEAL team was able to gather the intelligence they needed without compromising their security or timeline. More importantly, Sarah had demonstrated her value to the team in a way that earned their respect and trust. "I have to admit, I was wrong about liaison officers," Morrison told Sarah after the mission debrief. "I thought you would be dead weight, but you just solved a problem that would have forced us to abort the mission. Maybe there's something to this concept after all." The success of her first assignment gave Sarah confidence as she took on increasingly complex challenges during the exercise. Her next assignment involved coordinating between multiple international relief organizations that were competing for resources and access to affected populations. The organizations had different mandates, funding sources, and operational approaches, creating conflicts that threatened to undermine the overall humanitarian effort. Sarah's role was to develop a coordination framework that would allow the organizations to work together effectively while respecting their individual mandates and constraints. The challenge required her to understand the political and cultural factors that influenced each organization's decision-making, not just the technical and logistical aspects of their operations. The key insight came when Sarah realized that the relief organizations were approaching the crisis as a zero-sum competition rather than a collaborative effort. Each organization was focused on maximizing its own impact and visibility, leading to duplication of efforts and gaps in coverage that reduced the overall effectiveness of the humanitarian response. Sarah proposed a solution based on her systems engineering background, treating the humanitarian effort as a complex system with multiple interdependent components. Rather than trying to eliminate competition between organizations, her approach would channel that competition in productive directions by creating incentives for collaboration and coordination. The breakthrough came during a heated meeting between representatives from 5 different relief organizations who were arguing about access to a particular area affected by the crisis. Sarah listened to the arguments for several minutes before proposing a radical alternative to their competitive approach. "What if we stop thinking about this as a competition for resources and start thinking about it as a system optimization problem?" Sarah suggested. "Each of your organizations has different strengths and capabilities. Instead of competing to do the same things in the same areas, what if we designed a division of labor that maximizes the impact of everyone's unique contributions?" Her proposal involved creating specialized roles for each organization based on their particular expertise and resources, then developing coordination protocols that would ensure comprehensive coverage without duplication. The approach would require unprecedented cooperation between organizations that had traditionally viewed each other as competitors. The relief organization representatives were initially skeptical, but Sarah's systematic analysis of their respective capabilities and the comprehensive nature of her proposed framework gradually won them over. Her engineering background had taught her how to break complex problems into manageable components, and her training in cultural awareness helped her understand the organizational dynamics that would determine whether her proposal could be implemented successfully. The coordination framework was implemented over the following week, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The relief organizations were able to provide more comprehensive assistance while reducing costs and eliminating duplication of efforts. More importantly, the success of the coordination effort earned Sarah recognition as someone who could bridge the gap between military operations and civilian humanitarian activities. Her third major challenge involved working with local government officials who were suspicious of American military involvement in their country's crisis. The officials were willing to accept humanitarian assistance, but they were concerned about the long-term implications of allowing American Special Operations Forces to operate in their territory. Sarah's role was to serve as the primary liaison between the local officials and the American military commanders, building trust and understanding while ensuring that both sides' objectives could be achieved. The challenge required her to navigate complex political and cultural sensitivities while also managing the practical requirements of military operations. The local officials were led by Minister Alexander Petrov, a career diplomat who had dealt with international crisis response efforts throughout his career. Petrov was intelligent and professional, but he was also deeply skeptical of American military intentions and concerned about maintaining his country's sovereignty during the crisis response. "Lieutenant Chen, I want to be direct with you about our concerns," Petrov said during their first formal meeting. "We appreciate American assistance, but we have seen how humanitarian interventions can become permanent military presences. We need assurances that your forces will withdraw once the immediate crisis is resolved." The conversation required Sarah to draw on everything she had learned about cultural awareness, diplomatic communication, and strategic thinking. She knew that Petrov's concerns were legitimate and that addressing them would require more than simple assurances about American intentions. Sarah's approach was to focus on transparency and shared decision-making rather than trying to convince Petrov to trust American promises. She proposed a framework for ongoing consultation and coordination that would give local officials input into American military operations while ensuring that those operations could be conducted effectively and safely. "Minister Petrov, I think the key is creating mechanisms for ongoing dialogue rather than trying to address all concerns up front," Sarah suggested. "What if we established a joint coordination cell where your officials and our commanders meet daily to review operations and address any concerns in real time? This would give you visibility into our activities and influence over decisions that affect your country." The proposal demonstrated Sarah's understanding that effective diplomacy required creating structures for ongoing engagement rather than relying on initial agreements that might not address evolving concerns. Her systems thinking background helped her design a framework that balanced the need for operational flexibility with the political requirement for local oversight. Petrov was intrigued by the proposal, recognizing that it offered a way to maintain some control over American operations while still accessing the assistance his country needed. The Joint Coordination Cell was established, and it became a model for how military and civilian authorities could work together during crisis response operations. The final week of the exercise involved a complex scenario that combined all of the challenges Sarah had faced during the previous weeks. A natural disaster had been simulated on top of the ongoing crisis, creating urgent humanitarian needs that required immediate coordination between military forces, relief organizations, and local authorities. Sarah found herself serving as the central coordinator for a massive relief effort that involved multiple American military units, international relief organizations, and local government agencies. The scale and complexity of the operation were unprecedented, requiring her to manage dozens of different organizations with competing priorities and limited resources. The exercise controllers had designed the scenario to test the limits of what liaison officers could accomplish, creating challenges that would require extraordinary leadership and decision-making under pressure. Sarah would need to coordinate helicopter evacuations, distribute emergency supplies, establish medical treatment facilities, and manage communications between dozens of different organizations, all while dealing with simulated security threats and equipment failures. The pivotal moment came when a simulated earthquake damaged the primary staging area for relief operations, forcing Sarah to relocate the entire coordination effort to an alternate site with limited communications and power. The disaster occurred at night, in the middle of a complex evacuation operation that was already stretching available resources to their limits. Sarah's response demonstrated everything she had learned during her training and development as a Special Operations Liaison Officer. Rather than trying to control every aspect of the operation from a central command post, she distributed decision-making authority to subordinate coordinators and focused on maintaining overall situational awareness and strategic direction. "Everyone listen up," Sarah announced over the emergency communication network. "We're implementing distributed command protocols immediately. Each sector coordinator has authority to make tactical decisions within their area of responsibility. I'll focus on strategic coordination and resource allocation between sectors. We maintain communication every 30 minutes unless emergency traffic takes precedence." Her approach reflected the system's thinking and adaptive leadership concepts she had learned throughout the program. Instead of trying to maintain centralized control in a situation where communications and information were limited, she created a framework that allowed the operation to continue functioning even when individual components were compromised. The distributed command approach worked brilliantly, allowing the relief operation to continue despite the loss of the primary staging area. Sector coordinators were able to adapt to changing conditions in real time while maintaining coordination with the overall effort. Most importantly, Sarah demonstrated the kind of innovative leadership that the Liaison Officer program was designed to develop. The exercise concluded with a comprehensive after-action review that involved all participants, including the military units, relief organizations, and local officials who had worked with the liaison officers. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with participants noting that the liaison officers had significantly improved coordination and effectiveness during complex operations. Commander Steele conducted individual debriefings with each candidate, providing detailed feedback on their performance and areas for continued development. Sarah's debrief took place in a small office at the exercise headquarters, where Steele reviewed her performance across all phases of the final exercise. "Chen, your performance during this exercise has been exceptional in every measurable way," Steele began. "You've demonstrated technical competence, cultural awareness, leadership under pressure, and, most importantly, the ability to create solutions to problems that haven't been solved before. You've exceeded our expectations for what liaison officers can accomplish." Steele explained that Sarah's performance had been observed by senior officers from throughout the special operations community, and that several units had already requested her for upcoming deployments. The liaison officer program was being expanded based on the success of the pilot program, and Sarah would have opportunities to serve with various special operations units around the world. "There's one more thing I need to discuss with you," Steele said, his tone becoming more serious. "We've received a request for a liaison officer to support a highly classified operation that would begin immediately after you complete the program. The operation involves significant risk and would require you to operate independently in a challenging environment for an extended period." Steele explained that he couldn't provide details about the operation without Sarah's commitment to accept the assignment, but he could tell her that it would be exactly the type of complex, multidimensional challenge that the liaison officer program had been designed to address. The assignment would also establish her as one of the first operational special operations liaison officers, with all the opportunities and risks that such a pioneering role would entail. Sarah didn't hesitate in her response. "Sir, I'd be honored to accept the assignment. This is exactly what I've been training for, and I'm ready to put everything I've learned into practice." Steele smiled, recognizing the confidence and determination that had first attracted his